Hello. So, I wanted to make a video about freedom and why it matters. Um, so there's like, I exist and you exist, and there's like 7.5 billion people on this planet, and there's this question of like, so how are we supposed to interact? What are our obligations to each other? Um, Social ethics, and this idea of that whole arena. And I've been thinking about this for like a decade or so, and I know there's experts have been thinking about this, much more intelligent people than me. So I'm not an expert. This is just my views that I've come to, and I just want to share them, just for my own sake, really, and maybe it might help somebody out there. I don't know, but this is the way I've thought about it. And so there's all these. At the moment, I've the root I've boiled it down to is this axiom, I don't know what you want to call it, but love requiring free will. Love requires free will, I think, is at the heart of a lot of things and a lot of my way of thinking about social ethics, politics, all kinds of stuff. Freedom, free will. And I keep seeing this pattern emerging all the time, and these are just 5 of the things I could think of recently of ways that this pattern will emerge, and I'm going to go through them in this video, and hopefully you'll be able to see this pattern emerging. So the root, love requiring free will, and if we start with forced versus voluntary, because I think this is an important. I see this pattern a lot in life. When things are forced versus when things are voluntary, it makes a big difference to me. I had this thought. I think I'm just going to rant in this video because nobody's going to watch it anyway. So I'm just going to I'm not going to worry about the time too much. So I had this thought when I was going to sleep last night about how to explain this, and I imagined this group of people, and they're all trying to encourage one guy to do something. Let's say he's doing a moonwalk, and they're going, "Go on, do the moonwalk," and he's going, "Nah, I don't want to do it." They're going, "Go on, you can do it," and he's umming and ahhing. At this point, he's got a voluntary choice. He can either do the moonwalk or he cannot, and he's thinking about it, right? Now, if you imagine some other guy comes along, grabs this guy by the arm, pulls him into the middle of the group, he says, "We're not asking, we're telling you, do the effing moonwalk now," and then walks back. All of a sudden the atmosphere would change, and the guy still has a choice whether to do the moonwalk or not, but now the choice is totally different. If he does the moonwalk now, it's humiliating and servile, whereas if he doesn't, it's like much more of a stand against being forced, about the principle of being forced. It's like, no, I'm not going to do just because you forced me to do it. I don't know whether that's a good example, but I'm a bit like this. Sometimes, even if I was going to do something voluntarily anyway, as soon as somebody forces me to do it, it makes me not want to do it out of principle, because I want to do things, I want to have free will. And I think love requiring free will is a central part of being human. I think a lot of human beings, most of us, something in us wants that freedom, wants that choice, wants that free choice. We don't want to be forced to do things. And love requiring free will. So obviously you can't force love. If you force somebody to love you, it's not real love. And it's the same. You can replace the word love with charity, virtue, morality. When you do these things, if somebody forces you to do it, it kind of takes away the virtue. If you're forced charity, did you really choose? Whereas when it's your own free will, then it's yours. And for any theists out there, I think this is the way. There are some kind of theological ways that this is important as well, because I've always felt like God gives us free will, and free will, and it's also an answer to the question of the problem of pain and suffering in the world. The answer is, well, God gave us free will. That's why we have. That's the best answer. That's the best answer there is because we have free will. And I've always in my own personal life felt like God wants me to choose myself. God doesn't just say, right, now do this and treat me like a robot. This is what you got to do, just do it. He kind of seems to give me huge amounts of space and wants me to choose for myself, I find. And so, free will is very important in life, I think. And one other thought on that before I move on is in heaven as well. I've always had this question of, when you get to heaven, will there be free will? Because if there is, then doesn't that mean there'll just be evil in heaven? And my answer to that is not if people freely choose the good, which might seem impossible or far-fetched, but maybe that is the end point. That is heaven, is the end point, when we get to a point where we freely choose the good. And maybe, this is just, I'm talking philosophically rather than reality, I don't know, but the idea that there could be a life after the next age and the next age and the next heaven and the next heaven, until we get to a point where we freely choose the good, because I think morality is realizing that morality is there for our own good, and when we choose to do the good freely, we realize that it's actually for our own good. I don't know, hopefully I'm making sense. Anyway, that's the first point I wanted to make. Love requires free will, and there is a big distinction between forced and voluntary. When things are voluntary, there's just much more worth in it, much more, you get the credit, it has meaning in it. When it's forced, nobody really likes it when it's forced. But I'm not an absolutist, and I'm not saying that in society and life things should never be forced, and I'm going to say something at the end about that, but this is just like starting point, and I kind of feel like you should always err on the side of keeping things voluntary as much as possible. You shouldn't force things. Force should be limited in government, in life, in relationships. It should be limited as much as possible. That's my feeling anyway. So that's the first thing. Collectivism and individualism. The only thing I wanted to say about this is so this thing, I boiled it down to, love requires free will. There is this second point that I was going to boil it down to as well, which is that we are each alone. But I'll just include this in this second bit, this collectivism versus individualism, because it sounds a bit bleak, we're each alone, but because love requires free will, there is no guarantee that anybody will ever love you. And obviously, in reality, there's lots of voluntary love going around, so it's good. So I'm not saying, this is the case, but there's never a guarantee. The starting point is that we are alone, and we are also alone in the sense that literally in reality terms, human beings are individual creatures. We don't have collective minds, we have individual minds. We don't have collective feelings, we have individual feelings. I'm the only one that feels my feelings, nobody else. I'm the only one who has free will and choice of inside of me, nobody else. When it's time for me to die, I'm the one that dies. I'm the one that feels pain in my body, nobody else. We are individual human beings, and that's just the fact of life. And I think there's something very important about that. I almost feel like there's a fear inside of humans to accept that. Maybe there's a part of us, one of the appeals of collectivism and collectivistic types of thoughts, this is just a wondering, but maybe one of the appeals of it in life is because we're scared to face the fact that we're alone. It's very difficult to do that. So that could be one of the things. And I'm just going to make a couple other points on this topic of collectivism versus individualism. Because what was it? Sorry, I've written notes. My brain isn't firing today. So yeah. So one of the possibility why people cling to collectivistic ideas. Well, again, basically what I just said then, which is that being alone means you have to take 100% responsibility for yourself, and there's no guarantee anyone will love you, because love requires free will, and so there's no guarantee that another person will love you. Obviously, thankfully, in reality, there's lots of voluntary love, so it's okay, but that is the starting block that you need to kind of make your peace with, and then you can treat all love as a gift. I think that's the starting point. So anyway, that was just a possible why some people prefer collectivism to individualism. I don't know. And then another thought why people might prefer collectivism to individualism is because, again, this distinction between voluntary and forced. So collectivism, there is something good about it, and I might have to talk about this as well later, but morally speaking, there's something good about it, but as soon as you force it, it loses the goodness of it. And it's almost as though it's the same with socialism, you know. So the instinct to share the wealth and all of this stuff may be a very good instinct, but as soon as you force it, something goes wrong. Now I'm going to go on to the next bit, utilitarianism versus deontology, because this point I'm trying to make will come home when I show you this. So utilitarianism versus deontology. So I watched this lecture series called Justice by Michael Sandel, Harvard University. It's online on YouTube, and it's probably the best lecture series I've ever seen. It's brilliant, especially the first few lectures. And it's all about law and ethics, and he goes right down to the heart of it. In the first few lectures, they get right down to the core of ethics, which seems to be most of the thought throughout history seems to be between these two things, utilitarianism and deontology. It's also described as consequentialist versus categorical thinking, I think, something like that. Basically, this I'll show you this example of how this goes if you don't already know. So utilitarianism, there's a thought experiment, and you imagine a train on a track, rail car on a track, and it's heading along a track, and the brakes have stopped working, and there's 5 people, workers, on the track ahead. They've got their headphones in. They don't know this train is going to kill them if nothing happens. But there's a switch, and if you pull the switch, the train will actually go off of the track, and it will kill one worker. There's just one worker up there, and you have the choice. Do you pull the switch and let it go and kill the one worker, saving the 5, or do you do nothing and it goes and kills the 5? Most people say turn the switch, because killing 1 and saving 5 is better than killing 5 and saving 1. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is basically the greatest good for the greatest number, for the greatest amount of time. It's just maximizing good like that. So you think, okay, yeah, let's do that. But then he goes on to give another example. Says, okay, same situation, train on a track heading towards 5 workers. It's going to kill them, but this time, instead of a switch, you've got this bridge above the track, and leaning over the bridge is a really fat man, and you could push the fat man over the bridge. He would land on the track, stop the train, hypothetically speaking, saving the 5. Same principle, kill 1, save 5. Would you do it? And most people, their instinct is no, because there is something different about now you're actually pushing a fat man over the bridge and killing him. And usually something people recoil from that, because there's something in that where you shouldn't do. But the principle is, the utilitarian principle is still the same. And something that brings this home even more for me is he also goes on to give another example in a hospital. And he says, imagine that there are 5 people in a hospital. They all need different organs to survive. A liver transplant, heart transplant, kidney transplant, whatever. 5 organs to survive, or they're going to die. And then in walks a healthy man into the hospital, and the healthy man has all 5 healthy organs, So from a utilitarian point of view, why don't you just kill the man, take his organs, save the 5? You've killed 1, you've saved 5. Utilitarian. What's the problem? Well, again, most people totally recoil from that because you can't do that. You can't just kill an innocent human being to save the 5. There's something very, very wrong about that. And deontology is basically, it's more principles. It's not about utilitarian. It's saying, look, there are certain rules, certain principles that you just cannot violate. And one of them would be, respecting individual rights, and you can't just kill somebody and take their organs. And so they, deontologists tend to lean towards that. And basically, the conclusion I came to after I thought about all this stuff was that the only being in the universe that could justifiably be a utilitarian is God, because God knows everything, whereas human beings don't. And because we don't know everything, I think it's always better to err on the side of deontology and categorical thinking, err on the side of following principles, because our utilitarian calculations can be wrong. We can get this wrong sometimes. We don't actually know. And another example of this is there was another course I watched called Morality of Everyday Life, I think it's called Paul Bloom. It's online again, really good one. And Paul Bloom's really great. And he said in one of those lectures, I think he leans, well, he's kind of in the middle, and this is why I like him. But he said something in those lectures about a situation, a hypothetical situation where you have like a terrorist who has planted a bomb and it's going to kill thousands of people, and the FBI and the police have got him, and they need a code. They need to get a code out of him to stop the bomb. Is it okay to torture this person in that instance to save all these thousands of people? Now, a lot of people, most people, utilitarian people, will say, yeah, of course, torture him, get the code. But Paul Bloom was kind of suggesting that maybe that wouldn't be a good idea, because obviously the principle is don't torture, don't ever torture people. That's a bad thing. But the reason why you should trust that principle is because once you torture him, yes, maybe you'll save thousands of people, but you will now live in a society where torture is a thing. It's acceptable, and maybe that will have ripple effects, and torture will become more widespread. Maybe there'll be counter things, counter ripples, and maybe the psychological comfort that everybody in that society feels goes down, and how do you measure happiness and quality in life? Is it just death, or is it all kinds of other things? There's all kinds of calculations when you get really into it. And he was kind of suggesting that maybe maybe you shouldn't violate your principle. So I generally tend to lean that way. I tend to lean more towards deontology, because we just don't know our utilitarian calculations. We don't know all the ramifications and the ripple effects of our choices. So that's that. And then this positive rights and negative rights, this pattern shows up again here, which is that negative rights are the rights that human beings have where all people need to do to uphold their negative rights is to leave each other alone. So if I have a right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all this kind of stuff, if I'm just going around my life and I'm not hurting other people and they're not hurting me, I'm not infringing on their rights, they're not infringing on my rights, then our negative rights are upheld. So I could go and live in the mountains, I could go grow some vegetables, I can do whatever I want, I'm not harming anybody else. They're my negative rights. And as long as other people don't infringe on your negative rights, it's fine. So again, the idea of being alone and having that freedom to do whatever you want, really important. Positive rights are this idea that if you have a right, it requires somebody else to actually fulfill that right. So rights to things like healthcare, education, things like that. When people say you have a right to healthcare or a right to education, it requires somebody else to provide that education or that healthcare. And I don't see how this could ever work. So imagine a planet with 2 human beings on it. If those 2 human beings have a right to healthcare or an education, then, you know, if I'm one of those human beings and I have a right to healthcare, then I'm going to say to this other person, right, you have to fix me. I've got a right to healthcare. Care for me. Well, that other person says, well, I've got a right to healthcare. You care for me. And, you know, same with education. It doesn't work, because if I've got a right to healthcare, it requires somebody else to have to care for me. And this is the logic. I don't see how that works. I don't even think positive rights are a thing. They shouldn't be a thing. I don't know, but I don't see how that works. Whereas negative rights, there's just a very clear distinction there. Negative rights make sense to me. Just leave people alone. Don't harm each other. So again, there's a pattern emerging, and I'm showing this. And then the last one, socialism and capitalism. So again, socialism, the way I see socialism is basically forced charity, is the way I see it. Capitalism, I see it as the free market, whereas socialism is... See, and again, look, I'm not an expert about this. There's probably loads of people who know a lot more about this than me. But the way I see it is wealth redistribution. You are taken from the rich, given to the poor. That's the basic idea. And, you know, again, on the surface, it feels good. And maybe it is good when it's not forced, when it's voluntary. The idea of it is okay. Maybe it is a good thing, but it's the forced aspect that kind of kills it for me. Because so when I was younger, I probably would have seen graphs of income inequality, and if a politician had said, I'm going to take from the rich, give to the poor, I would have said, yeah, go for it, good for you. But now I realise that you're actually stealing from the rich in order to give to the poor. You're stealing from the rich to give to the poor. And that's a violation. That's a principle, a deontological principle that you are violating now in order to do that. And the problem is with that is, so this is where the ripple effects, when you violate a principle, start to happen. You know, so you make that utilitarian calculation in your head, and you say, yeah, take from the poor, rich, and give to the poor. And in your mind, you think, yeah, that's the way it should be, and you've made this moral decision in your mind, and you think that's how it should be. But this is how the ripple effect works, because when you take from the rich and you give to the poor, the rich, it kills incentive, is what it does. Because when the rich stop trying, they think, well, what's the point in me doing all this work if it's just going to get taken from me? So their incentive goes down, their productivity goes down. Maybe they leave the country or stop working something, because there's no point, no incentive. And the poor stop trying as well, though, because the poor they think, what's the point in me? There's no need for me to work because everything gets handed to me on a plate. And then so the top and the bottom of society shuts down, stops producing. But then you run out of money, so you need to kind of go to the next one down, the upper middle class or something. You take their money and you give to the poor. But then the same thing happens for them. They think, well, what's the point of me doing all this work when everything gets taken from me? It's all taxed. I'm like taxed so high. So their incentive goes down and they stop working. And all the while at the bottom, there's a kind of race for the bottom, because people are seeing that the poorest people are getting free handouts and they're getting loads of attention. So you get this kind of race for the bottom, you know. And all the while, the tops and the bottoms of society are just closing in and losing productivity. And if your goal with a whole society, you've got a whole society of hundreds of people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, and your goal is to get the absolute maximum out of every single person in that society. Socialism isn't the system to do that. To get the best out of everybody, socialism kills incentive. And this is why throughout history, I think from what I can hear, it like never works. And this is why it never works, because it just kills incentive, kills productivity, and then people starve. And everybody runs out, and it doesn't work. Whereas capitalism is freedom, and giving people, because they're alone, it makes people 100% responsible for themselves. And it says, look, it takes the roof off and says, up you go, the sky's the limit, do what you want, you're free. And when you've got a whole population of millions of people all racing to the top, there's huge productivity, everybody's going upwards. That's maximum productivity. And because of that, you got so much wealth that the problem about the poor gets solved anyway. So the poorest people in today's society are still like a lot better off than other societies. I mean, I know we've still got problems with the poor. This is just basic fundamental thinking about it all. But because a lot of people say that capitalism is evil and it's all about greediness and selfishness. But for me, the reason why I favour capitalism over socialism is because I think that is the best system that helps people. I think if you want to help people, the best system is capitalism, not socialism. So the reason I like capitalism is because I want to help people more. I think it helps people more, and I think I need to, from what I can hear, it's the best force that is pulling people out of poverty out of any other force. It's raising standards of living for everybody. So that's why it's not about selfishness and greed and like individual rights and just like I just want to be on my own. I don't care about anybody else. The reason I like capitalism is because it's the best system for everybody. It does work. Now this is just broad strokes. There might be things to say in the middle. Sorry if my brain isn't great at these video things. I didn't think I'd be very good at it, but I'm just going to keep ranting because I need to get these thoughts out. So what else did I write in my notes? Socialism, capitalism. I had something else to say. And so the other thing about socialism is that that pattern is also similar to wokeness. This wokeness is basically a form of cultural socialism or cultural Marxism. And instead of taking from the rich and giving to the poor, it's instead of wealth, it's privilege. And you take from the privileged and give to the underprivileged. And again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Wokeism, there are nuggets of truth to it. But same with socialism. It sounds nice on the surface, but it's the force aspect of it. It should be voluntary. But with wokeness, it's like, so you take from the privileged and give to the underprivileged. But all that happens is the super privileged, which is basically like straight white men apparently, they start to feel resentful and like unrespected and unloved in society. So they kind of like stop trying because they think, well, what's the point in me doing anything when nobody respects me? Everything I do, people just hate me for it. So what's the point? And so they kind of give up. And then all the while, there's this kind of oppression Olympics at the bottom. That's what they call it. The race to the bottom. Who can be the biggest victim? Because they're the people now who are getting all the love. And all you're doing is the same thing. You've got this big society and you're just shutting down society. And again, you might have noticed this kind of the idea, the definitions of racism widening. It gets wider and wider, and it's like it's the same thing as you start with the super rich and then you get the upper middle class, and you're trying to get more and more. It's that you're just trying to kind of get more people to attack and to hate so that you can feed the underprivileged people with respect and love or with something. It's the same kind of mechanism that's going on, I think, and it's probably not going to work because socialism never worked, and it's the same driver, I think, the same pattern. So I don't think wokeness is going to work. So that is all my points. I've got loads of other things to say about Ayn Rand and the Drowning Child. I think I might make another video about the Drowning Child and Ayn Rand. I had lots of other thoughts about that. Yeah, I'll make another video about that. But the only concession I would make is that, so this is just like starting point. This is where I lean. So love requires free will. That seems to be the heart of it. And all of these things on the left, you know, the kind of socialism, collectivism, they all sound utilitarianism. They all sound nice on the surface, and I feel like the intentions are there, and I feel as though voluntary socialism is fine and voluntary wealth redistribution is fine. And this is the concession I'd make, 'cause I almost feel like in an ideal world we wouldn't need political socialism because human beings would naturally redistribute the wealth anyway. We would all help each other out. That's the natural way it would be. And I do sometimes wonder whether maybe in reality socialism is okay if we're living in a society where human beings are not redistributing the wealth enough. So it's a little bit like it's like freedom maybe is something you have to earn in a society. So it's a little bit like when you have a teenager, when a parent has a teenage or a child, son, daughter, and they when they're very well behaved, they earn the parents' trust, and they are, they earn more freedom, and they can go out, stay out later. They don't have to check in all the time because the parents trust them. They've earned that freedom because they've done the right thing. Whereas when you have a naughty teenager who is doing the wrong thing all the time, the parents start closing in and they start checking up and they start giving, rules and curfews and all this kind of stuff. And that naughty teenager hasn't earned their freedom, and so sometimes maybe governments and politics and societies are like that, where the ideal world is to give people freedom and say, off you go, have freedom, and then hopefully people would do the right thing. Like in an ideal world, you wouldn't even need the police because nobody would commit crimes, and you wouldn't need political socialism, forced socialism, because people would just help each other out. And maybe we need socialism at times when a society is failing to redistribute the wealth and help each other out, and maybe that's when force comes in. That's one of the thoughts I've had recently, but I'm not totally sure about that, because sometimes I feel like the more you bring socialism in, the more it makes it, the more destructive it is, the more it makes people think in terms of socialism rather than freedom, in terms of being dependent on handouts and things rather than realizing they have to take responsibility for themselves. So it's almost like a band-aid, but like a toxic band-aid that you don't want to put on for too long because it just makes things worse. I don't know. I think you should always err on the side of this right column, keeping things free, voluntary as much as possible. Yeah, and I see that pattern in the coronavirus and the way we're responding to that as well. And I think I'll make this my last point because I'm waffling on. I don't think this video has been very good, but in the coronavirus, so one of the ways I think about it is like, I had this thought of, in America, sometimes you have hurricanes. A hurricane will come along, fly through Florida, let's say, and normally the way we respond. So this is an analogy to the coronavirus, and it's not a perfect analogy, but it just gives you a sense of the way I kind of think about it. So a hurricane comes through. When it's coming through, what the government usually does to that is they don't evacuate the entire country. They just evacuate the area where the hurricane is going to hit. And even then, they don't I don't think they force people to leave. They just advise people, say, look, a hurricane's coming, this is how strong it is. We would advise that you leave the area. And even then, some people choose to stay. And that's right. They should have a free choice to do what they want, I think. And then the hurricane comes through. Hopefully, the government have facilitated the evacuation and they've done their bit and it's all fine. And then afterwards, the rest of the country that wasn't affected by the hurricane at all, they might ask for charity. They might say, look, we've got all this destruction. We need some help. Could you help? And usually lots of people voluntarily help with charity. Well, with the coronavirus, it almost seems to me like, so this hurricane's coming through and it's affecting 80 plus year olds, maybe 70 plus year olds a little bit, possibly 60 plus, but the older people. Most young people, young healthy people, the vast majority of society is not affected by this at all. They're not affected by this at all. And so if we were to respond to that in the same way as the hurricane, we would say, okay, people who are vulnerable, you would say to them, here's this hurricane coming through. It's called the coronavirus, and it's going to be quite dangerous. We would advise you to do social distancing, order online, wash your hands, all this kind of stuff. Go very, very careful, because there's things coming through. And then, the rest of the country, we could ask for charity. You could say, try to social distance as well. Try to do what you can, whatever you can, you could do, but should be voluntary. Something like that. The only problem with that analogy is that there's this sense of, maybe in this example, we are the hurricane. The ordinary people, we're transmitting the virus, and maybe we are the hurricane as well. So I need to think some more about that, and I might make a separate video about that. Anyway, so I had a feeling these videos are going to be crap. I'm not very good at explaining myself, but I can't be bothered to spend too much time making them perfect. So this is about all I wanted to say about freedom. Love requires free will, and I think it's better to err on the side of keeping things free. And there are my thoughts. Okie dokie. Bye bye.